could kind of go around and start introducing ourselves. We'll probably have a couple of other visitors join us as we get started. Nonprofits tend to be running a couple of minutes behind. So let's get rolling. I'm Nikki from City of Light Consulting. We're based in Buffalo, and we are a consulting firm that's designed to meet the needs of small and young nonprofits. So we offer a scaffolding of services around those organizations, and they can involve marketing, they can involve grant writing, and involve forward coaching or strategic planning. And that is the coolest thing about what we do, is that we try to meet your need wherever you are and help you grow to the next phase of development. So that's a really exciting thing about our firm. It distinguishes us from firms that just grant write or just do fundraising. Beth, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and young audiences?
Sure. So my name is Beth, and I am the development coordinator at Young Audiences. I'm kind of new to the position. And so right now I'm kind of handling all of our donor relations. I'm starting to take on a little more grant responsibilities, so I'm hoping to learn a lot from this. For those who don't know about Young Audiences, we're an arts and education organization where we provide in-school and out-of-school programming, assemblies, and residencies to students throughout Buffalo and the 8 counties of Western New York. So.
Great. Wow, I didn't realize that you were all 8 counties. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Dick, do you want to share a little bit about the Live Greater Foundation?
Sure. I'm Dick Montgomery, and I work for the Live Greater Foundation, and we're a very small charitable nonprofit that really puts some emphasis. Our mission is to provide for the poor, and we really have 2 categories or silos we work in, where we try to identify needs through our service organization, community needs that need immediate attention, and we try to enlist a group of volunteers that are local that can help fulfill that need. We also have a media component that does radio and video production, more along the lines of probably Catholic orientation. We have 2 young men that live in New York City. One's a priest, and one is a year away from being ordained a priest, and we work through homeless shelters and food banks in the New York, New Jersey city area. And I have used City of Light for everything that Nikki talked about, and we've even written some grants. We've never actually scored a home run on a grant, but as far as strategic planning, as far as marketing, you name it, and I think our small foundation has worked with her group to accomplish many good things.
Thanks, Dick. Thanks for saying nice things about us. Tracy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Tracy. I work for the City of Light, and I do a little bit of everything on the back end of stuff, admin work, a little bit of the grant work, billing. So those emails and stuff come from me, and that's that's me.
You're very much appreciated. So let's get started with our dialogue. We might welcome a few more people as our time together moves on, or we might just be a small group today. So the point of Roundtable is that we get the opportunity to discuss in kind of an intimate setting some challenge that the nonprofit world struggles with. And funding, I think I would say, is the main challenge that I've noticed that the nonprofit world really struggles with. And that leads to a variety of other things. You know, when funding is limited, staff salaries are low, and so people could be discouraged, or it could be really, you have to work a lot of overtime in certain community organizations because there's just not enough people to do the work. Or, you know, for example, you're just like, you're printing things out by hand and they have to be black and white rather than like in being able to invest in like having some place do them in color. And so it can be like this negative feedback cycle where funding challenges lead to other funding challenges. A grant from our side is kind of part of the solution, but also it can be like a medicine that people don't understand the side effects of very well. And so we're doing this roundtable on grant writing because we think that there's a lot that organizations can learn about how to do grants well, and when a grant is appropriate and when a grant may not be the best answer. So a lot of the times I'll get a phone call like, hey, I want to write a grant to buy this building because I want to start a nonprofit and it's $300,000 and, you know, can you do that for me? And the answer is probably no, like, because, you know, an established track record is really, really important, and not being a nonprofit is a really big liability. But when we talk about a grant, we're really talking about the delivery of an amount of money to a nonprofit. A lot of times people say, like, I'm going to write a grant, but what they mean is I'm going to write a grant proposal. And that's, you know, just fine to use that lingo, but like the actual grant is the gift of money. That's the actual gift that's happening. So typically there's a process that is different for every organization that you could potentially request funding from. And Tracy's nodding because she knows it like really runs the gamut. Sometimes they ask you for an email, like the Craigslist fund. They just want an email with like no more than 2 paragraphs sent to this one address, and they may or may not reply. They may never tell you anything about whether they even received it. And then other times, like in the case of the Pollinator Project that we apply to quite frequently, they ask for a list of questions to be responded to. And then once you've responded to that list of questions, they respond with another list of questions, and you could go back and forth with them 4 or 5 times, and it's for $1,000. So like sometimes you do very little work, and sometimes you do a ton of work, and you know, you are competing in a pile with 100, 200, 1,000 other applicants. And sometimes it's a multi-step process. The most common one is that you'll be asked to submit a letter of interest, and then they'll choose the letters of interest that most interest them, and then they'll ask you to provide a full proposal. And so that's the most common way it's done, but with the introduction of computers and like everything becoming electronic, it's becoming a little bit less clear how the proposals work. So Tracy, why don't you tell a little bit about the different crazy things you've seen out there in the grant applying world?
So the one thing that drives me crazy is we could have done 10 grants for the same organization, and I still have to go back to their customer and say, we need this document because we've done this 10 times, but the 11th one needs something completely and totally absurdly different. Well, like I guess we applied for Finish Line, which is a sports store, and they wanted us to provide them the list of the sports stores that are near us, which I got from their website because I have no idea.
So like, how is that not their job? But it's but they're the ones with the money, so they get to make the rules.
Yeah, so it's like it's a whole gamut of random documents, and they might ask for the budget in a completely different way than another one. They want, you know, last year's, and they want it compared to what the actual, you know, expenses were, or they don't even care about last year's. They only want this year's, or they want next year's, and they just want the program, or they want the organizational budget. And you know, as I said, every single one, it seems like we should have everything, and there's still something completely different.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that comes up pretty frequently is that like they'll ask the same question in a different way, and they're trying to guide you towards a response that like clarifies whether you line up with their intentions. And knowing that is really important too. Like we apply for some organizations that kind of straddle a line between 2 priorities. A really good example of this is an organization that we work with that installs solar panels on schools and health clinics in the developing world. So on the one hand, they could be considered like a health organization. And then on the other hand, they have this solar energy thing going on. And there's really 2 types of funders that you could consider when that's the case, or just like general development. But when you talk to each one, you have to talk to them in a way that is indicative of your understanding of their priorities. So Beth, I think that this might be something that you see a lot, because on the one hand, you might see arts people who are really interested. Have you had any experience with that just yet, or are you still just getting started?
Still kind of just getting started, but I know we've run into that where we, especially when you say that the two types of funders, one, we're an arts organization, another one we focus on education now. So there's kind of two different realms that we can go into with that. And so there's a lot of different areas that I know we've run into those issues as well.
So, I mean, it's good that you know it. One thing that I've noticed is that, like, when you're writing grants, you're kind of building a library of text that you could always go back to and say, like, oh, the last time I talked to somebody about this project from the education field, I used this text, and can I, like, take that and use that again? Or, you know, I know that I had some good stats about this in this other document. And so a lot of grant writing winds up being copying and pasting, but it can really be tricky if you get too much into the habit of that, because you could forget the really, really critical thing of, like, customizing it a little bit for each client, to each funder. So the people who issue grants, we call funders or grantors. The grant process typically involves what's called an LOI, which could stand for a letter of interest, letter of inquiry, and then a second step would be a full proposal or grant proposal. So when we say writing a grant, we mean writing a grant proposal. So some big first steps that we've noticed about becoming grant ready. Hey, Dick, do you remember any of the first things that we made you do when we were walking through the process to become ready for grants?
Well, I
don't need to pop quiz you, sorry.
No, I think the first thing that, and this probably doesn't answer your question, but, you know, it was terribly difficult as a young organization for us to identify a mission and then really work hard to try to position ourselves to complete the mission. And I think that is what City of Light, you know, really stressed, is that, you know, you have to have a mission and you have to stick to it. And then I think that allows them to really go out and identify funding sources. And I think that's probably not answering your question, but that was one of the first things that coming out of the business world and trying to understand the nonprofit world and how you go after money. I think that was probably one of the most difficult things for me to adhere to, because I like to change the mission about every 3 or 4 months. And City of Light would be,
that's probably wrong, actually. I think I get calls from you pretty frequently about changing the mission. Sorry.
I think it makes it a lot easy for grant writers to charge forward and try to find, you know, the necessary funding if you can really identify and focus on who you are and what you want to be when you grow up.
Yeah, I think actually that's, like, the most relevant thing that I could tell people, because, you know, I have clients call me sometimes. I remember I got a phone call from a woman who saw that there were grants open for STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math education. And she decided that was what she was going to do. And she had previously, like, founded a Bible college, and the Bible college hadn't worked out that well. And so this was going to be, like, her new thing, because she thought that there was grant money out there. But starting a program or starting an organization based on, like, seeing a few grants, funding shifts all the time. Or even just thinking about, like, what are my interests today in a way that can be changing is a big challenge. So we get calls a lot from people who think, like, well, this grant is, you know, ready to go out, and, like, the due date's next week, and I think that we should start a program that does that. I worked for a health nonprofit once that wanted to start a women's drumming class, because they were like, well, it's sort of exercise and also it's sort of health. And I had to say, like, I really don't think so. Because when we start to shift our mission based on where the funding is, or when we don't have a strong enough sense of what our mission is, we're not talking to funders in a way that's firm and compelling. And so being really certain about what you do, what you want to do, and why it's valuable is absolutely critical. So Dick, I think you brought up a really great point. There are some other... What's that?
I think that it really, we're about 3 years old, and we did, the City of Light did strategic planning for the foundation in early spring, well, let's say late spring. And, you know, it wasn't until then that we really got, I think, our focus, you know, nailed down. And I have it on my wall here in my office, all of the yellow, you know, pieces of paper that actually say who we are. And I think I look at them every day. But that is the most critical piece, I think, of the whole grant writing process. And I really feel confident that someday, you know, as we do more things as a foundation, referenceable things, and can show, you know, the communities that we are who we are, I think that will lead to landing some funding. But you got to know who you are. Anyway, I'll be quiet.
No, you're saying really great things. I think, you know, key to knowing who you are is being able to express what is my mission, what is my vision, and what are my core values. And so when we talk about those three things, I talk about vision as being, what will the world look like when we're done with it? So on the day that you can pack up your boxes, or, you know, in the case of an organization with regional impact, what would my region look like when we're done? So on the day that we could pack up our office, close our door, take down our sign, because we're so confident that, like, the community has completely shifted, that's your vision statement. So I believe that the vision statement for World Vision is a world without hunger, or no, that might be Feeding America. Anyway, that's so straightforward, a world without hunger. And then, so when you know that piece, that, like, how will I know when I've arrived? Then you can have the conversation about, how do I get there? And that is your mission statement. So, you know, in the case of Live Greater, there was this question about, you know, what do we want the world to look like when we're done? And the media and the service seem to almost be in competition for funding and staff attention. And, you know, we needed to figure out what is the center point. And having that dialogue, I thought, was really important, and kind of working through what a mission looks like. And then your core values really speak to the how. And so for City of Light, one of our core values is creativity, because we believe that the best solution is probably not the one that worked for someone else. So every single one of our clients that we work with, we believe that they're best served when we're accessing creativity in the solving of their problem. And most organizations identify 5 to 7. And what starts to happen is you kind of can weigh those in your activities and say, is this a creative solution? Like, if a key value for you is dignity and respect, am I treating these clients with respect? Am I being treated with respect? Am I, you know, am I offering in my criticism of staff the respect that's critical to our organization? But when you know those things, you could start to look for funders that identify with you and start to kind of key in on who it is that I should best be speaking to. Moving forward a little bit, from that core mission vision concept, a lot of foundations that are out there will have those similar documents, you know, their mission, their vision, their core values, and you can kind of look and see, are these good fits, or are they not going to be an excellent fit for us? Are they going to struggle a little bit in understanding our position? So for example, there's a grant that I write pretty regularly for that's a Jewish funder, and I have some clients that are they're Muslims, and I have some clients that are Catholic, and they claim that they're ecumenical, but their list of funders, fundees that they funded before, seems to show that they rely pretty heavily on funding Jewish nonprofits. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all kind of fund in our image, and we start foundations to do things in our image. But it helps me as a grant writer know that it's not a strong choice for somebody like the Live Greater Foundation, for whom Catholicism is very important and central to their identity. So knowing your own mission, core values, vision, and then being able to say, where does that fall in comparison to the mission, vision, core values of this funder is going to be really important. They'll also give you some other expectations that it's really helpful to know in advance. Tracy, can you give an example of some of the things that you've been asked for by funders?
Document-wise, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, they all want to know you have a budget, so you've thought about where your money needs to go. A lot of time, well, they all want to know that you're a registered nonprofit, so you have your 501c3. And let's see, website, almost all of them ask for a website. It tends to be optional, but especially with letters of interest, they come back and say, we looked at your website. So that's a pretty key thing. Sometimes they ask for logos, sometimes they ask for photos. Again, those tend to be optional, but I tend to find that the more you give, the better it always is. Trying to think. A lot of times they want to see that you're 990, so you filed your taxes as the nonprofit.
Sometimes they want those a few years back too. Like sometimes they'll ask for 2 or 3 years back. Sometimes they will ask you for your audited financial statements. And if you don't have those, sometimes an organization can make a really good case in like their cover letter and say, hey, listen, you know, we're a really small organization. We haven't had the opportunity to do an audited financial statement yet because our budget has always been this, because they're quite expensive. But for the most part, if they ask for them and it seems like a really firm requirement, unless the fit mission-wise is so strong, it's just a no-go. So knowing in advance what their priorities are in that regard is really going to just help you not write a 10-page grant and then find out that you totally aren't a qualified applicant. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Tracy.
Well, no, that's I was just saying sometimes too you find out that it's a grant for an average of $500 and you're going to have to create a ton of documents to meet the requirements. It might not be worth it because of the amount that you're asking for doesn't, you know, justify the labor you put into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely true. Especially in our case, because our clients generally pay us by the hour, we try to avoid things that are just going to be, you know, slim chances and like require a lot from us. In the case of staff, like if there's a dead time of the year where that's accessible to you and you just want to throw your hat in the ring and get some practice, that's not necessarily a bad idea. But there's like one particular funder that they never fund me on the first try. They always fund me on the second. And their form that they want you to fill out is a Word form, but it's not like actual entry of like a form. You know how there's sometimes like text boxes? It's actually just like underlines in Word. And then you like, as you're typing, the underline is moving and the entire form is like moving and like shifting and totally changing the way it looks. And there's just no, like I've tried it 4 or 5 different ways. There's no way to get it to look nice. And then sometimes they'll send you, you'll fill it out exactly to their specifications and they'll send it back to you and say like, we just didn't have enough information. So I started to send them like these giant packets alongside their, like with 4 or 5 documents and like, you know, charts and graphs. But some funders will tell you, absolutely not, you don't send us any other things. Some of them will tell you if you staple your proposals, or if you don't send 8 versions of your proposal, or if you double space instead of single space, or if you single space instead of double space, you're just automatically disqualified. Because there are so many.
It's interesting.
Yeah, there are so many people that come to their desk.
I know we've run into that.
Yeah, it's crazy. And it might be like this tiny little asterisk at the bottom of a form. And there's just like nothing more heartbreaking than that.
Yeah, I know what you were just talking about. I know we've gotten some pretty basic forms that we'll fill out, and then the same issue happens. We'll send it in, and then we'll be like, well, we can't really give all the information that we want to give you because of how limiting the form is that you're giving us. So we'll send the packets, and then we've had that happen.
Yeah, no, it's really disappointing.
We'll send it. Yeah.
So
because of course you want to give out all the information you can. So
Yeah, totally. And the thing is, like from the standpoint of somebody who's actually been on the review team for some grants, I know that like that is so exhausting. Like you're reading proposal after proposal and they all start to blend together and you really want to be able to consider everyone fairly. And it really is a fairness issue for some of them. But man, it can really be a pain. So yeah, that's definitely something to keep in mind. So there's a couple things that I always look to for organizations to kind of make the determination of like how grant ready they are. And one is that they have a skilled board that's meeting regularly. Another is that they have financial documents in place. They have a clear idea about what their vision is that they want the funding to go to. So let's say that I think somebody just entered the call. That's nice. Hi. So they have a clear idea of where the funding is going to go. So if you're applying for $10,000, let's say, it's not because you need $10,000 and it's a part of a $100,000 project. Like you know where you're going to spend that 10. So even if that means that you have to bite off a smaller piece of the project so that you can talk to that grantor about that project. For example, a church in Maine called, and they've been wanting to build a community center. And they've been sending out these like LOIs, we'll say. They were sort of like an LOI, but with a lot of extra information to these funders that were giving like $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 gifts, and basically saying like, hey, can you contribute to our mission of $150,000? And the grantors obviously were just like, what? No, like we do 5,000. You need 180,000. Like, why would we do that? So what I suggested to them, other than like a few tweaks to their format, was like, don't tell them you need $5,000 because you actually need 180. Tell them you need 5,000 for the kitchen to like buy, like to do a commercial kitchen inside of this new building, or tell them I need 10,000 for the or that I need money to help with a very specific biteable need, a really specific chunk. And I think that will really help them. It's too soon to say, but funders are definitely like really straightforward in their ability to understand. I think I'm getting a lot of background noise. Do you think we could mute lines if we're not?
And I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Everything. And I found the only requirements you have are yes, correct.
So, so that I think will really help. So even if you have a really big vision and a big project, going ahead and saying like, okay, how can I make this into smaller chunks so that I can fund it? And that's true of crowdfunding too. We tend to like think about what the smaller needs are so that we can identify donation levels. So like, let's say for an organization that does soccer for girls that we're working with right now, they know that like $5 buys a soccer ball. So that's like the $5 donation level is, and so $10 pays for girls' food for a day at this camp that they're doing. $20 does the next thing. And that pattern of individual donors of knowing that they have like this complete biteable chunk that's all theirs, that they can totally handle, that we see the same thing echoed in our grant funders. So I think that that's really important to keep in mind. We do occasionally have a situation where we're like, this is a $25,000 funder, it's a $50,000 project. We think we could make a strong case that we can really easily raise the other 25. So let's do that. Let's go for it. And that's been successful for organizations when the project is like, biteable in like 2 or 3 chunks and the funder is such a good fit. Otherwise you'll wind up with funders saying like, well, what if you get this 10 and you don't get the other 150? And that is a big question that they ask a lot. So I think that's something that to totally be mindful of too, is like, what is the typical funding situation of this organization that I'm applying to? you can find out this information on a document called a 990. If you're a nonprofit, you've been filling these out every year, but funders also fill them out, which is really helpful because you can look and say, okay, these are the grants that they gave last year. So they gave a $5,000, a $10,000, and a $100,000 grant. Well, what is the likelihood that I'm going to be compelling enough for the 100,000? And like sometimes you'll see that their average gift was something, but they gave like 1 or 2 giant gifts and then 30 really small gifts. And so I tell people not to identify like the average, but to actually look at what is the most typical number you see. So usually like these small family foundations might give like a larger chunk to a hospital that's doing renovations, or like a college that they make a really large gift to every year, but they give like 5 or 10K to smaller nonprofits around their region. And so knowing that is really helpful too, and a really key part to becoming grant ready. Any questions or thoughts about that?
What, at some point, Nikki, could
More so.
you just share a little bit of, say you get a grant, I don't know, pick a number, what's expected of the people that from the funder? What do they expect? Do they monitor your performance, or how does that work once you get a grant? I know that's not exactly on topic, but
No, it's totally on topic, because, you know, a really important part of being grant ready is being able to meet the fulfillment expectations. So, you know, if you're a one-person shop and you promise that you were going to feed 100,000 people, are you ready for that grant? And, you know, are you going to damage funder expectations? So one of my earliest experiences in nonprofits was actually coming into a project that was dying, because the way that it had been funded just wasn't sustainable. And so I needed to kind of like enter it and say, how do we shore this up so that we don't damage a relationship with this funder? Because it was like a really, really big funder in our region. So the answer to your question is that every single funder is different, just like they're different in their proposal strategies. And they will let you know. And so sometimes they're going to want quarterly reports on like how the money has been spent with a profit and loss and a list of your activities. Sometimes they just want pictures at the end of the year and a letter of how it was spent. And sometimes they just say, cash the check, thanks a lot, have a great afternoon. So you have kind of a really wide spectrum of possibility in terms of like what you might be expected to report. So that's the reason why asking for a 10K grant when you have a $200,000 project is troublesome, because that funder might say, okay, I want to know at the end of the year what you did. And at the end of the year, you might not have raised the other 190,000, so that you could report back well to that funder. Now, if that's the case and there's some issue, let's say you had some problems securing the staff you needed and you had a hard time getting a project done. Sometimes funders are really understanding to that being the case, and they would want you to reach out to them and say, hey, this happened, we're on it now, this is the progress we've made, and we think that we'll do the rest of what's needed at the end of the next 3 months, and kind of ask for an extension. And other times they will say, we would like our money back, thank you very much, please don't ever apply again. So it's really tough, and I think that the majority of these funders really want to do the right thing, but they're in the power position, and so they get to define what the right thing looks like. And sometimes they could be really meticulous and it's a really taxing process on the organization. And sometimes they're really generous and kind and sweet, just like all of us, right? I mean, we all kind of run the gamut. So that's a great question, Dick. I'm really glad you asked it.
And a lot of times you'll see that on the grant application, it'll tell you what's expected of the end. So if you look at that and you're like, there's no way I have the manpower to do this, well, maybe it's also a factor to consider when you apply.
Yeah, definitely.
thank you. Very good.
What other questions have come up when you're thinking about grants?
I guess I know for us, we while we focus on arts and education, we also like to go into different realms. So we look into the health, we look into nonviolence. So we look into all these different areas as well. So I guess it's just kind of a matter of using what other resources are out there to find kind of grants that we can apply art, education, and health, nonviolence, or I'm not too sure of the other ones, but just for example, those ones. So
yeah, and that can be tricky because, you know, if you have a funder that's specifically interested in nonviolence, you have to make the case that you're the best service delivery person for your product, and they might only know you as an arts organization, and then you have to kind of show that you know the statistics really well, show that you understand the problem really well, and that I think is the biggest challenge, because you won't have any, you know, let's say you just chose a new area and you just decided like we're gonna work a little bit more on nonviolence. I don't know if that's true or not, or if you've been doing it for some time, but and you are planning on approaching a funder with a program that's arts-based but addressing violence. The important thing that you can do in that case is to show the funder that you've done the research locally and nationally and you're competent in this area, because they're going to be experts in it if that's the thing that they feel passionate about, passionate enough to have founded a foundation. So, so determining how do I talk best about this? How do I express that I fully understand the spectrum of this issue? And in that moment, just saying, I'm not an arts organization that focuses on nonviolence. I'm a nonviolence organization that's using the arts, just at least mentally as you're writing it so that you could communicate effectively with that funder is going to be really, really critical. Again, because they know it really well and they're probably familiar with other organizations who have more experience. So you have to show them that you're at least competitive with those organizations and that you're at least as knowledgeable. Another thing that I think is oftentimes forgot about when we talk about grants is your metrics as someone who is doing a project are really important. So let's say you have a great idea and it is like such a compelling idea and everyone you talk to you about it says, that's amazing. How does this not exist already? Wow, I'm so excited. You're approaching funders with a really exciting idea, but there are people who are doing work and who have results and that they can show like, okay, that's a really cool idea. And they might have a couple really cool people working with them. But these people did things last year, you know, they fed 1,000 people or they gave out turkeys or they, you know, they invited 1,000 kids to art programs. And so the really, really important thing as you're doing programs is to say to yourself, like, what things should I be tracking? A good example of this is that Feeding America, they're a national nonprofit that helps resource food pantries locally. They do it in pounds of food delivered. Because if you think about it, like, what is the objective measure? Like, are you saying like cans of food, boxes of food, how much fresh produce, like, et cetera, et cetera? So they just decided the easiest metric was pounds of food. And that they would track the amount of pounds of food delivered by each food pantry. So they have a standard metric. They know exactly what they're looking at. So if you're a domestic violence shelter, then that's nights spent in the shelter, or this many women got helped. Or if you're an arts program, this many children participated in this many hours of arts programming in these ages. Doing that backwards is really hard. Tracking while you go will make it so much easier, but deciding what the measurable result in it is in advance is going to make it so much easier, because you're just going to wind up feeling like you have the numbers when the proposal comes in. So let's say then that you decide, I'm going to start a nonviolence program. That's brand new. I haven't done that before. The thing that you can do to make that stronger is to say, I know all the stats about nonviolence, and this is the incredible work that we've been doing in this other area. And it shows that you're competent. It shows that you track responsibly, which is something that funders are going to look at and think really highly of. And it shows that you took the time in advance to prepare to understand that piece of your organization's impact, which is really critical. Any questions about that concept? Because it's a little bit, it's the part that gets a little bit sticky, I think.
No, that was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Any other questions before we head off the line today?
I don't think so.
Well, guys, it's been really lovely to sit down with you. I am going to send out an email with a grant readiness assessment. It's an Excel document that allows you to kind of grade your organization's progress and whether you're at a place where you should be pursuing grants actively or whether you have some areas to strengthen. We are here as a firm if you should ever need us to help write grants, or even better, if you should decide that you need help strategic planning or with project structure so that you can become the strongest possible candidate for those grants. I'm really grateful to have gotten a chance to chat with you all today, and I'm excited to have met Beth for the first time and to sit down with Dick, one of my favorite dudes, and to those of you that were on the line but didn't chat much, I hope we hear more from you in the future. Have a great afternoon and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.